Chris Sewall here, baseball card collector, investor, dealer in that order. Welcome everyone. I wanted to try something a little bit different today. I absolutely love stats, sports stats. I find them really interesting, odds stats, all that stuff. So I wanted to make a video about three of my favorite, most incredible stats that I've ever seen. I've mentioned a couple of these on the channel before, but I wanted to sort of make an entire video about it. If people really like this video, I can do this as a series easily. It's not really sports card content, but it is sports content. So yeah, let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this or not, and if you'd like to see this as maybe a once a month type of thing, as there are endless interesting stats out there. For this video, we have a football, a basketball, and a baseball. All right, we'll start with football, and our football stat is based on a trivia question. And the trivia question is, who has the most receiving yards in NFL history after the age of 40? This appears to be a very just sort of innocent trivia question, that would produce a very normal answer. But if you look at the top 4 answers on the board, it produces something quite bizarre. The all-time leader in this category is probably no surprise to most, Jerry Rice, who is the all-time leader in career receiving yards. He had a very, very long career. Nothing shocking to see him land here at number 1 with over 2,500 yards receiving after the age of 40. But here's where it starts to get a little weird. If you were making a guess for number 2, there'd be a million players to consider. Larry Fitzgerald or Tony Gonzalez or Steve Largent or Art Monk or any number of wide receivers or tight ends who had long careers, but in fact none of them played into their 40s. The player who lands at number 2 is in fact a quarterback, Tom Brady, with 6. Brady had 1 reception for 6 yards at the age of 41. If you weren't already aware that Jerry Rice was an absolute beast, here is more evidence of it. But now on to number 3, and if you want to try to take a guess on who number 3 is, go for it. And I'm going to tell you right now, your guess is almost surely correct, as number 3 is everybody else, every other player in NFL history with 0, all tied with each other, except for 1 player, and that's the player who lands at number 4, Brett Favre, who had -2 career receiving yards after the age of 40. At the age of 40, he had 1 reception for -2 yards. I just love this stat, love how the distribution works out, and both you and I can claim to have more receiving yards after the age of 40 than Brett Favre. Interesting that the list includes the GOAT wide receiver, the GOAT quarterback, and another Hall of Fame quarterback. You would have thought maybe there's like one obscure player in there, but not the case. All right, next up is basketball, and our basketball stat is a box score stat put up by Dennis Rodman in a game in 1993. And for those not familiar with Dennis Rodman, he's a Hall of Famer with sort of strange career numbers, as he was kind of a specialist player, but an absolute monster in his specialty categories. Extremely strong defensive player and one of the greatest rebounders of all time. He led the league in rebounds 7 seasons in a row and actually averaged 13 rebounds a game for his career. Meanwhile, he averaged just 7 points a game for his career. That's one of the lowest totals of any Hall of Famer. Averaged less than 2 assists per game, so essentially had nothing to contribute offensively other than rebounds. I guess when you play on teams with Isaiah Thomas, David Robinson, Michael Jordan, and Scottie Pippen, that works out fine. Okay, so 20 rebound games are pretty rare. They're not incredibly rare, but they're pretty rare. For reference, in the 2021 season, there were 34 times a player had 20 rebounds in a game over the course of the season. So it happens about once every 40 games or so, there will be a player with 20 rebounds in a game. Rodman had quite a few 20 rebound games in his career, including one on December 13th, 1993, with the San Antonio Spurs, a game they lost to the Utah Jazz, 102-87. In that game, he put up a stat line that I believe only Dennis Rodman could have ever put up, and this is a stat line that has never been matched and is unlikely to ever be matched again. He did reach that 20 rebound threshold, a very impressive 1 game total, but he also had nothing else. 0 points, 0 assists, 0 steals, and 0 blocks. When people talk about triple doubles, these are the 5 categories they are talking about. He put up zeros in all 4 categories other than rebounds. This while playing in 43 minutes in the game. He went 0 for 4 from the floor, did not attempt a free throw. He did register 1 turnover and 4 personal fouls for whatever that's worth, but in the triple-double categories, 20 rebounds and 0 everything else. 20 rebounds and 0 points has actually been accomplished 12 times in NBA history. I was surprised it was that much, but never zeros across the board in the other 3 categories as well. All right, now the baseball stat, and this is a stat that is truly incredible if you understand the context behind it. It's a stat put up by Barry Bonds, who obviously his career has been tarnished by PEDs, but if you were to ignore PEDs, Barry Bonds would be in the conversation for the greatest hitters, greatest player of all time. He won 7 MVPs and was putting up crazy numbers throughout his career, but The 4-year stretch from 2001 to 2004 was absolutely ridiculous, putting up numbers we had never seen before, basically, video game numbers. The stat I want to focus on is intentional walks, or intentional bases on balls, when a player is walked intentionally so pitchers don't have to pitch to them. Here are some career totals of intentional walks by some of the greatest names in baseball history. Babe Ruth, arguably the greatest hitter of all time. You got Lou Gehrig from the 30s, Joe DiMaggio from the 40s. You got players from the 70s like Robin Yount, players from the 80s like Cal Ripken, players from the 90s and 2000s like Alex Rodriguez, current players Mike Trout, Bryce Harper, Shohei Ohtani, etc. These are the career intentional walks that each of these players have put up, and you can see the number of seasons they played on the left. Mike Trout on this list is the leader with 119 intentional walks in 13 seasons. Well, in 2004, pitchers decided to intentionally walk Barry Bonds 120 times in a single season. His single season intentional walk total here is greater than the career totals of all these all-time great players. The number is so off the charts that it's really hard to put in perspective. Here are the highest single season intentional walk totals in Major League Baseball history. You can see Bonds owns the top 3 spots. He actually owns 6 of the top 10 spots. And the highest non-Barry Bonds total is Willie McCovey with 45 in 1969. So Barry Bonds basically tripling the highest total of any other player in history in this category for a single season. Here's the top 10 intentional walk totals for a career in Major League Baseball history. You see Barry Bonds with 688 sits number 1, more than double number 2, Albert Pujols at 316. There's no other category, or I would be surprised if there was any other category in any major sport where a player owns the single season record by essentially 3x and the career total record by more than 2x. I'll tell a quick story about this as it has a personal memory for me. I was a massive baseball fan in the 1990s. I watched every game I could. I listened to games on the radio. I'd go to games quite often. I would check the box score of all games every morning in the paper. I knew all the league leaders. I knew all the standings and all the MVP races and all of that. I probably watched, over 1,000 games on TV start to finish in the 1990s, at least. In the late 90s, I went off to college, and then I did some international traveling after that. And meanwhile, my favorite player, Cal Ripken, retired. So I sort of lost interest in baseball all at once right around 2000. And I basically didn't pay attention at all for a few years. In 2004, I turned on a game randomly, and I'll never forget, as it was the first game I had watched in maybe 2 or 3 years at this point. And it was just a random game between the Padres and the Giants. It was not an important game. It was sort of in the middle of the season, and there was nothing really relevant about it. The Padres were winning 4-0, and in the top of the 7th inning, with nobody on and nobody out, they intentionally walked Barry Bonds. And I was completely baffled by this. I'd never seen anything like that before. To me, intentional walks were reserved for 8th or 9th inning, 2 outs, really, really close game. You got a runner on second and third, first base is open. You'd rather pitch to the guy on deck than the current batter. Just sort of very, very in-game specific strategic situations, very, very specific set of circumstances which would lead to an intentional walk. I had just never seen or heard of a player being intentionally walked in a 4-0 game with nobody on and nobody out. I was thinking there was some sort of glitch in the matrix or some strange thing going on, they were honoring Barry Bonds in some way, but I could not figure it out. I didn't realize till later it was a legit strategy because Barry Bonds was just that good. You'd rather just put him on first base than let him hit, even in a completely non-critical part of the game. But that's it for 3 of my favorite stats of all time. Again, if you enjoyed this and would like to see more, please leave it in the comments, as I would really enjoy making these regularly, but want to make sure it's something that viewers would enjoy as well. But appreciate it, and see you all again next time. Thanks, everyone.